Just before we begin, this video is sponsored by Skillshare because I'm sure a lot of you out there are budding filmmakers, writers, artists and so on who aspire to master their craft, learn new skills, or simply want to meet other like-minded individuals. Well, Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes designed to not only give you the most efficient and practical advice, whether you be a novice or professional, but each class allows you to interact with your tutor and supportive peers to obtain valuable feedback on your work, which I always say is essential to bettering your abilities. Since Skillshare has no ads and is always launching new premium classes, including live sessions to connect with others in real time, Skillshare is committed to ensuring you have membership with meaning. It's open-minded, encouraging, and has genuinely helped me feel more confident in not only my creativity, but also myself. I'm a very insecure person. This month, I've been listening to Benjamin Percy's series on writing suspense because I'm a very linear writer, which works for my videos, but not so much when planning works of fiction. Benjamin's videos break down his personal writing process and introduce concepts that help avoid burnout before the finish line by pacing all the smaller details in between, which I typically forget in the heat of the moment. I basically learned to just slow down and stop treating storytelling like it's a race. It's more of a marathon where you go at your own endurance and balance out the energy so it doesn't all get consumed in the opening. The first 1,000 of my subscribers who click the link in the description box below will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare so you can start exploring your creativity today.
Nothing's up with me. It was an accident. I'm the one who's got to live with it, not you.
Nobody wants you here. Nobody.
Christian Bale's performance in Brad Anderson's 2004 psychological thriller The Machinist is arguably one of the most vulnerable and committed roles of his career. At the very least, it was the role that called attention to his uncompromising devotion to his craft, as many accounts have detailed his staggering 63-pound weight loss 4 months prior to production, which included a diet of cigarettes, whiskey, coffee, an apple, and a can of tuna each day. The story goes that once production was complete, Bale immediately proceeded to not only regain all his weight plus more, but went through a rigorous training program to prepare for his next role as the lead in Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins, which subsequently accelerated him to stardom.
Trying to fatten me up?
However, for as fascinating as the story is, it's been told countless times before, and has since overshadowed the film itself to the point I'm convinced not many people have actually seen it. Hell, while I'm sure I'll be proven wrong in the comments below, I am genuinely curious how many of you have heard about Bale's unhealthy weight loss, but still have absolutely no clue what the film is really about. It tells the story of the titular machinist Trevor Resnick, a repressed insomniac who becomes increasingly troubled by a mysterious man called Ivan, and soon sets out on a self-destructive journey to figure out who this man is, mirroring his search for his own identity and igniting delusions and paranoia as Trevor shambles his way towards personal clarity. From that vague description, you can see why The Machinist did not obtain much popularity outside of Bale's performance, because admittedly, for the most part, it is the one unique and essential component that holds together an otherwise conceptually generic, if emotionally and visually alluring psychological thriller. It all builds towards a revelation that is aggressively but thoughtfully foreshadowed and symbolized throughout, in both sickening and heartbreaking ways, as it keeps you questioning who Trevor truly is.
Is someone chasing you?
Not yet. But they will when they find out who I am.
The Machinist is a hybrid of Memento, Fight Club, Jacob's Ladder, and as you might tell from the tonal similarities of this video, 1 Hour Photo, as it flows ambiguously between realistic and surreal, as we see this grimy, gritty world through one isolated perspective that makes you doubt a lot of what you see. According to Lisa Rosen, Trevor was simply described in the script as a walking skeleton. His weight is a raw reflection of his psychological state. He is someone who is literally wasting away from his anguish and wishes to fade into oblivion where nobody can see him.
If you were any thinner, you wouldn't exist.
While I won't give away the big reveal until slightly later in the video, I will warn you now that a lot of this discussion will give an obvious indication as to where things are going, but I feel it does tie into the film's clear sense of inevitability that's established right from the start, as Trevor is about to be confronted with having done something terrible and unable to take back.
If you were any thinner, you wouldn't exist. What's wrong?
I don't know. Deja vu.
The Machinist is ultimately about conveying the visceral chaos of a guilty conscience and the deteriorating and exacerbating effects that come with neglecting problems that you cannot run away from. Think of it as Trevor basically being trapped in this psychologically tormented limbo where he attempts to find peace with a traumatizing and violent past that has corroded his life ever since. According to the film's screenwriter Scott Costner, the story was greatly inspired by the work of Fyodor Dostoevsky, an author who wrote stories heavily around 19th century Russian society in the context of psychological, religious, and philosophical themes such as free will, identity, morality, and basically everything Trevor experiences. In fact, The Machinist could be seen as a kind of condensed amalgamation of some of Dostoevsky's most prolific novels, including Crime and Punishment, which deals with the guilt and morality of a killer, The Double, which explores identity through the conflict of a doppelganger, and side note, was adapted into a fantastic film by Richard Ayoade, and The Idiot, which we actually see Trevor reading, that deals with the broader complexity of how each of us perceive the world around us. That is a very understated way to describe Dostoevsky's work, but when you take the film's premise of a psychological limbo and its blatant emphasis on the road to redemption into account, it's easier to digest a lot of the unusual and cryptic circumstances that occur throughout the story. Most of it can be simplified as metaphorical to Trevor's guilt and the very past that haunts him, yet don't worry, it's not exactly one of those it was all a dream style narratives. It's more of a blend between reality and how it becomes manipulated and distorted by Trevor's guilty conscience. By the way, I just want to jokingly say at this point that you could turn this video into a drinking game where you take a shot every time I say the word guilt, because I am going to say it a fucking lot. Anyway, the significant catalyst to Trevor's journey is when he's held responsible for an accident at work in which his colleague Miller loses his arm, causing Trevor to not only sink deeper into his pre-existing guilt, but grow paranoid that everyone is now conspiring against him. The reason for this accident is that Trevor becomes distracted by the arrival of the mysterious Ivan, who seems to take an imposing interest in Trevor, even going as far as to follow him about and taunt him with his guilt.
Quit fucking around, a guy lost his arm, he could have died.
That ain't my problem. You caused the accident.
Now, the thing is, Ivan's arrival into Trevor's life comes shortly after a mysterious opening in which Trevor is attempting to dispose of a body for unknown reasons, establishing a tense conflict between the two. Soon after, we see Trevor recurringly washing his hands with bleach, which becomes a very telling action throughout the story. He obsessively uses it as if to harmfully and aggressively wash his hands of a guilt that just won't go away, which is further reflective of Trevor letting his body seemingly decay. As a result, Ivan can essentially be seen as this manifestation of what Trevor constantly seeks to cleanse himself of, but can't. Ivan is like a parasite to Trevor's conscience, which is even symbolized through an impending storm that approaches in the background.
Radio says there's a storm on the way.
Yes, sir, right.
I'd say it's already here.
The only real respite Trevor seems to get from the looming presence of Ivan is through the emotional companionship of a sex worker called Stevie and a server called Maria who has a son called Nicholas. They are the only people who appear to be earnestly sympathetic towards Trevor, compared to the brash and brooding men that dominate the rest of his life. However, just as Trevor starts to find peace with either one of them, he's pulled right back into his guilt, with the appearance of Ivan or imagery that triggers his past, or a strange hangman post-it note, all of which continue to taunt him with a one-word answer that only Trevor can solve. Although there is one male figure in Trevor's life to show him any compassion, and that's Miller, despite losing his arm as a result of Trevor's negligence. Miller is more than willing to forgive Trevor without even a shred of anger, yet almost immediately after, Trevor nearly ends up in a suspiciously similar accident when his arm is caught in a machine that's mysteriously switched on. His response is naturally to assume that Miller was seeking revenge, and goes to his home to confront him, only to learn in a subversive twist that Miller was actually sincere in his forgiveness.
Accidents happen out of negligence. This happened out of spite. Ill will, vengeance. Vengeance means revenge, Miller.
This is one of the most interesting aspects of the story. Everything alludes to this idea that someone is seeking vengeance on Trevor for what he did. If it isn't Miller losing his arm, then surely it must be Ivan for showing up shortly after Trevor disposed of a body that hasn't even been mentioned since the opening, as if it never happened. That is where the film really digs into Trevor's paranoia. There is no escaping the persistent feeling that someone is out to get him, yet we're never given any true rationale as to why Trevor thinks this. That's because he is driven almost entirely by the impulse of his guilt and seeking reassurance from Stevie and Maria to make himself feel better, even if it's only temporary.
A little guilt goes a long way.
The sole clue Trevor personally has to go on is a hangman post-it note that he keeps trying to figure out, but all the lapses in his day-to-day life that go unexplained might start to make you distrust the man you started out feeling sympathy for. Right, I'm going to pause here because I want to go into some specifics that I can't talk about without properly spoiling the film, so this is the absolute final warning before we go any further. So I'm going to assume most of you have already worked out that Ivan does not exist. That bit is at least somewhat obvious. I mean, if it isn't from the fact that it establishes pretty quickly that Trevor is the only one who can actually see him, it's the subtle visual clues mirroring both characters, like the match cut of them smoking a cigarette to show the synchronicity between them. If you're familiar with psychological thriller tropes, especially from the early mid-2000s, you've likely seen all this before, but I personally never let these things bother me if the film is still capable of taking me on one hell of a ride. Basically, the Machinist takes that everyday kitchen sink blue-collar American intimacy and completely distorts the reality with Trevor's mental distractions that, when pieced together, build a picture of the events he's trying to suppress. In fact, you could watch this film multiple times and still pick up on numerous props and details that have significance to Trevor's guilt, especially with the persistent emphasis on doppelgangers, duplication, and mirrors. Now, I do not want to explain the meaning behind everything because, as always, I encourage you to watch it for yourself and really experience how it delivers all the clues about Trevor's past. But with that said, taking everything I've said and shown up to this point, the event Trevor is trying to run away from is when he killed a child in a speeding accident while negligently distracted by trying to light a cigarette, and instead of taking responsibility for his actions, he drove away and evaded prosecution. Ever since, his life has become a biblical punishment of sorts, where he ironically cannot kill or run away from his guilt, and thus, in between reminders of those harrowing events, he creates a delusion in which he befriends the woman whose child he killed to help him cope with that guilt. Pretty much all the events in the film do happen, but some are altercations of other memories. For example, the carnival day out with Maria and Nicholas was a delusion formed by memories of Trevor's own childhood and his relationship with his mother, while his cafe conversations with Maria were actually just him sitting quietly as the real waitress nervously left him alone. That's what I think makes it such a powerful portrayal of mental anguish in general. It shows us the real world through the eyes of depression, and how it's further complicated by intrusive thoughts that, at the very least, are real to Trevor. Now, what about that supposed murder from the opening? Well, other than the fact that it symbolizes the actions of his past, when Trevor eventually confronts Ivan, and assuming he really is a manifestation of Trevor's former life, Trevor murders him only to soon realize that there is no way to ever get rid of him. Trevor simply cannot run away any longer. Hell, just earlier that day, he tries to force a hit and run to obtain Ivan's license plate, only to reveal it was Trevor's own car, thus prompting him to run away from the police, who we can also assume were clearly on the lookout for that exact license plate since the day of Trevor's hit and run. It finally results in Trevor doing the right thing and turning himself into the police, where we see him escorted to a cell that's brightly lit to reflect the lights at the end of the tunnel. Trevor has finally put himself on the road to salvation, where he can now finally sleep, thus finding psychological peace. Trevor's journey can be seen as a dual narrative. It's a cautionary tale that warns about the fragility of life and how one simple action can instantly destroy or change everything, while on the other hand, it's just as much about owning your mistakes and finding moral liberation in responsibility and paving the way for self-forgiveness. I hope this video has given you a reason to check out The Machinist for yourself. Again, I don't like giving a linear breakdown of events because I think it defeats the purpose of the story and the emotional journey it wants to take you on. So in the comments below, let me know your thoughts, and if you have a recommendation for a film that takes you on a unique journey like this one, make sure to tell me all about it as well. And until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you all very soon.